So I'm very happy to introduce you once again and a little bit Frédéric Jiguet, who has been talking about his actually pathway from papers to purpose already yesterday, but now he's going to expand it a little more. So Frédéric is currently a professor at the National Museum in Paris, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wojtek, and thank you for being here after a long evening, I suppose. So when Wojtek proposed me to come here to present some researchers and birds, I answered that maybe it was interesting for me not to present only research results, but like the history of my career, if I can say that, at least the way I see my job and the way I switched at some point from some kind of very nice science and research to, I would say, more useful, to my opinion, work, to be able to act more efficiently and more rapidly on public policies. And the whole story started in 2000. As I told you yesterday, I was very, very lucky in my career. I started a position at the museum in Paris 2 months before defending my PhD. And then I didn't move from the lab, the same lab, which grew up. We were 3 researchers at the start. We are about 30 now, with many postdoc and students. So I arrived there in 2000, and my first position was my first job was to restart the French breeding bird survey, which was almost dead, to think about a new protocol, sampling design, and to motivate bird watchers to join. Why was I recruited for this job? I was a bird watcher already, very keen, inserted in NGOs and with many friends starting to work in NGOs. So I was identified as a good candidate to be able to restart very rapidly the breeding bird survey, because I had like a network of young bird watchers in the different part of France. So I'm a bird watcher. That's the point. Since I don't know, my parents say you were 5 years old, you already looked only at birds and wanted to see birds. And this hobby also is translated into many papers, but also books about birds. So I authored or co-authored many books. Maybe you know The Girls of Europe, etc. Some of these books have been translated. We made a photographic guide with a friend on birds of France and birds of Europe, which was translated in Danish, Dutch, English, etc. I even made a small book which was translated in Chinese. I don't know why, but that's it. That's fun. And as a bird watcher, I was also a twitcher. I've been chairman of the French Rarities Committee during many years, and within my top birds I found in Europe, I think there is the only record of giant petrels, which we saw in the Adriatic Sea when we were 18 years old, moving to Greece and Turkey to birdwatch. And also the first European record of kelp gull found at the small zoo at the museum in Paris, well before I started to work there. I was still a student and going there to look for the captive gulls, to see which wild gulls were coming to join and breed with them, hybridize, and we photographed this strange gull, which happened many years later to be identified, that we identified as a kelp gull. So my job at the museum was to restart the breeding bird survey, and it worked well. You see to the left the map of the sites that are monitored, more or less, I mean, a few years, but this is like a historical map. And as all breeding bird survey, we regularly report on the decline of breeding birds in our country. And we also at the start mostly started and then joined international European initiatives or even beyond our frontiers to analyze the data, common birds facing global change, climate change, adaptations, delays to move northwards, agriculture pressure, and this led to many, many papers, sometimes in very good journals. So you think it's really nice, we have an impact, we do good research. But so up to 2013, I had published about 150 scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals, supervised 10 PhD students, a few postdoc students, and I got a professor position. I was not 40 years old. And then I realized that all these papers did not change most things for birds. If you report the decline of farmland birds in 2001, in 2002, in 2010, nothing changed. And I think the only paper I published at this time, which made some things changing, was a paper about tracking breeding booted eagles, a few pairs in southern France, which were used to define the area, the quiet area that we should protect around the nest so not to disturb the eagles. That was the paper I made that had a direct translation into protection of birds. All others, I mean, you see the cap and what's going on farmland birds, but we still publish 23 years later that farmland birds are declining, that pesticides is the most important pressure to explain the decline of birds in Europe, and I'm afraid in 10 years or 20 years we'll be able to publish the same papers. This analysis at the European scale was coordinated by my first PhD student, Vincent de Victor, en français, who is now a researcher at the CNRS. And so, in that year, professor at the museum, I had the opportunity, as the head of the French ringing scheme, I was asked to pilot a research project on the ortolan bunting, which is supposed to be protected over all Europe. It's an Annex 1 birds directive species, but it was forgotten from the list of protected birds in France because there was a traditional hunting of the species to be eaten. There was strong conflict between the BirdLife partner and hunters each year in the field. I don't know if you know, some of you might know what is the CABS, the Committee Against Bird Slaughters. They started to come in France to destroy the trapping places, fight with hunters sometimes, or trying to escape the hunters who wanted to fight. And the Minister of Ecology in France wanted a scientific study. I mean, the hunters wanted to do a scientific studies to be able to catch ortolans officially and to prove whatever they wanted. And the minister preferred to ask the museum to pilot the project. So I accepted, and it was a real revelation for me. This is a kind of trapping site that the hunters used. You have captive ortolans in small cages which attract migrants, which stop on the tree, then go on the ground and get caught in these small traps. And then they are put in the dark, feed ad libitum, and they just feed, and they end up like a a bowl of fat. They are roasted. You can find some cooking advices on internet, but you plunge them in cognac so that they have life, so that they have cognac in their lungs, and then you take all feather off except on the head because you have to identify it's an ortolan, and then they are roasted and they are eaten by, like, I don't want to give some description. So the job was to try to identify which populations were migrating by southwest France and what could be the impacts of taking 15,000 ortolan buntings in France each autumn. So the idea was to create a European continent-wide network of colleagues. That's all sites where I managed to work with colleagues through the ringing centers, my birdwatching network, and we started to catch birds there. We use different methods, light loggers, stable isotopes, genetics. We did some nice fieldwork that we could not do today. This is a very nice nature reserve with a lot of ortolans near Belgorod in Russia. And this is this is to illustrate the light loggers. This is an ortolan from Volgograd, also in Russia. It's not possible yet now to work there. And this is the same bird 1 year later when we retrieved the logger. And we first analyzed this data and revealed that there are 2 main flyways and a third central one, and that at least the millions of ortolans breeding in Russia do not visit France, so that the population size concerned is probably very small. The isotopic data confirm that we had 2 different groups, which can also mirror this flyway, like this. Birds from Eastern Europe winter in Ethiopia, and birds from Northern and Western Europe winter from mostly Mali and Senegal and Gambia. And genetically, we identified 3 clades with microsatellites. And importantly, the northern one is very isolated, with no exchanges between population. So this is like a summary of the results. And the most important was this one, so concerning the birds that migrate by Western Europe, and they mostly come from Germany and Poland, so EU countries. The hunters wanted to prove they were hunting Russian ortolans, so they are millions, so they can continue. And with this, we proved that they are hunting EU ortolans, which are not numerous and which are strongly declining. Then we developed demographic models and different scenarios and showed that by taking ortolans in France, we are within this red box, and that depending on the sex ratio and clutch size, the extinction risk is certain if we do nothing, and could drop by high probability if we stop hunting ortolans in France. In fact, poaching in France was doubling the decline of these populations, because they were twice more declining than usual ortolan buntings, which are declining because of agriculture, climate change, many reasons. But these populations have a double figure, and if you don't kill 15,000 ortolans, they just have the same decline as the others. So it was not, poaching had a great impact. And this led to one of the paper I'm most proud of in Science Advances, with a lot of collaborators, which I love to do that, a big team, and from this and the pressure put by the NGOs at the European level to the Justice Court, poaching was definitely banned in France, and we know that the Poaching Association, which had thousands of licenses, dropped to 1 or 200. So this activity stopped, and so within a 3 years project, with a collaborative team and fieldwork, which was also coming back for me, we produced nice scientific paper, and we obtained a final ban of the poaching activity, saving 15,000 ortolans each year. Probably less and less, because it's still declining. So I decided to start similar projects, and my target species were only the red-listed species that were hunted almost only in France, because all other countries were reasonable and understanding they were declining. We had to stop, but not French hunters. The idea is not to take position to say it should stop. The idea is to do research, to highlight the mechanism, and to identify the impact of the activity on identified populations, so that on migratory birds, usually you say there are many, they come from far away, northern Russia, we don't know what happens, but they are still coming each year. So if we take a large part, it has no effect. And in fact, not, and science and research can show what happens. So started on Eurasian curlew and turtle dove. I will mainly present results on curlew here, with first illustration. This is a juvenile curlew tagged in Germany by some colleagues we are working with. Young curlews migrate at the end, early August, alone between juveniles, because the female left the breeding site often early June, the male end of June, when the chicks are even not flying. Then they finalize the growth and they migrate later. Early August is the opening date of the hunting season in France. And you have young curlews arriving to France from Poland, Germany, finding a nice place to stay. You see this small pond with grassland around, and in fact it's a hunting hut. And these birds just arrived to France, flew along the river, over the pond, and the tag tells us that when it was here, it started to go down. So it's facing the hut. It landed here, and 5 minutes later, it was in the hut. And then the tag moved to a house. Eurasian curlew is a huntable species in France, but there was a quota of 0 that year. And we proved that it was not respected at all. We had 4 tagged curlews in northern France, and all 4 were killed during the first weekend of the hunting season. In 3 of these cases, we identified the hunter, because we identified the house. The hunters take the tag to their house. That's incredible. And in these cases, we were able to retrieve the bird. You see the bullet there. And this hunter was fined. He said he found the birds, but the data from the tag proved that what he was saying was not the truth. And I published this in papers on forensic science. Concerning the curlew, the idea then was to try to understand what's happening to the juveniles. We started to tag a lot of juveniles in France, and this is a picture of where the juveniles are wintering now. Hunting is prohibited, except that year now it's respected, because they know that if they hunt a curlew, they can be fined greatly. And you see that within these 10 juveniles, 40% winter in Iberia, and 6 wintered in France. So about 40% only winter in Iberia. But at the same sites in France, we also tag adult birds, and they almost all, 97%, winter in Iberia or Morocco. This species is very faithful to the wintering site. Juveniles go at one place, they will stay there for 2 years, then come back to one breeding place, and then they will winter exactly at the same site. So how can it be possible that juveniles, now that there's no hunting in France, do winter largely in France, but adults do not winter in France? The hypothesis is that formerly all juveniles that tried to winter in France died, were hunted, most of them, and that today they can winter in France. So probably before there was a strong impact of the hunting activity on juvenile survival and then potential recruitment in the breeding population. And in Normandy, when we monitor curlews precisely, we can show that the species, the number of breeding pairs has been declining for a long time. The scale is not proportional. Then there was a complete hunting moratorium here. They started to increase. Here, the hunters obtained that the moratorium did not concern the coastal areas, where 95% of curlews are. So they restarted to hunt, and this is the end of the hunting of the species, but which is very fragile. Every year, the government decides if the quota is 0 or more, every year, so we have to prove that it's necessary to protect it. And then you have a big increase and probably a large recruitment of new adults because they are able to survive for those who try to winter in France. So this was also like a pilot study to make more science, tag many birds, create large collaborative networks. On curlews, we tag a lot of birds on the breeding grounds to see where they winter, but also the other side, on the wintering grounds to see where they breed. And the idea is to develop models, to model the probability of migration connectivity, integrated with demography. We have a paper submitted with these first models, and then integrate which birds breed where, winter where, what is their survival, reproductive success, and be able to model the hunting impact at some places on the survival, the trends of the other population. This is what we transformed and upgraded to a larger project, which is called Habitrack, funded by the European Union. This is typically the European Union made a call saying we want a project identifying the impact of hunting and habitat needs for huntable bird species in Europe, which have an unfavorable conservation status. So we have a lot of data on curlew, and we added 13 more species. We work with 7 institutes. During 4 years, the plan is to deploy 1,200 tags on these species with 4 million euros. And we are hiring a lot of PhD and postdoc position. That's the advert time better. And as you know, we are still looking for, you can apply to a PhD position here at Brno with Petr Prochaska. What will we do in this project? First, tag birds, obtain many high-frequency locations on the breeding grounds, on the wintering grounds, coupling these locations with land use data, Copernicus, etc., small woody features, and try to model the probability presence of these birds with the density of these elements to define optimal densities of small woody features that's total of use, and say, if you want to restore habitat or to manage habitat, you will get the most gain in bird presence between 0 and 5% along this line, and the optimal is at nearly 6. For grassland, it's quite different. You can go up more, and then we can provide recommendation, which is what the EU wants to influence policy to, like, this is a hypothesis, it's like to showcase, but like say, so if you want to favor turtle dove, you should introduce at least 6% of small woody features in croplands to maximize the gain for the bird presence. Then we'll work on many other aspects about the carryover effects, which are also important to consider, to know how the species will breed. Consider also climate change. Where should we mostly invest in this restoration or management measures? In places where the species will be present in 20, 50 years, maybe not at the southern ages. This is also to provide recommendation. So this is just starting, and I will come back to see other fledglings maybe later to present some results, I hope. By creating and integrating this network on Eurasian Curlew, it means that also many colleagues can access the data. We share the data, it's open access, and we started to work on other questions about human-induced mortality related to the huge wind farm developments which are scheduled in the seas of Europe. And German colleagues analyzed their data and our data and many data on Eurasian curlew, first to identify the collision risk, using the flight altitudes of the curlew in the Baltic Sea to see where the birds are at lower elevation and could meet wind farms. Or this study published is about the behavior of the curlews. So you only have the part of the tracks which are close to wind farms, and the idea is to see if the direction of the flight or the altitude of the flight is changing when approaching wind farms. So we did that not for wind farm planning, but we have now a huge data set to study this and also inform public policies. Why do I say that again about public policies? Because I was funded by the French government to start tracking projects to better inform the public policy in France about wind farm planning, offshore wind farm planning. I'm in charge of the telemetry projects, but at the end there are many parts, and we'll combine with, there is radar, there is sea coast observation, at-sea observation, acoustic monitoring for bats and even birds, and telemetry for birds. And then the aim is to integrate all this data into models to help avoiding the biodiversity-rich areas when planning wind farm. So we tag many, many bird species. Here is a species that is very famous here in Czech Republic, very studied. It's a cuckoo. But there are like 60 species we are tagging and studying. You have a sample here. There is one project dedicated to the Mediterranean Sea, another one to the Channel and Atlantic, the Bay of Biscay, Brittany, etc. So many species studied, and that's the kind of track summaries we got for the Atlantic Channel project during 1 year. With, in blue, it's the seabirds, in yellow, it's what we got now from more terrestrial, but the one going very up is a turnstone going to breed in Greenland. So we see we cover all direction, which is great fun. What kind of result we obtain? It's like flight altitudes over the sea, over the continents too, for a range of species. These are shown for GPS tags, so we can also know if the birds are migrating by night, how long, when they start, to maybe constrain the functioning of the wind farms. If they are developed, say you must stop at night during this period, otherwise we will kill many migrating flamingos, spoonbills, chiffchaffs, whatever. We also obtain data from this transmitter for diving species about where they dive and how deep they dive, where they feed. This is also important because wind farms, offshore wind farms, can also modify the foraging habitats for these species. So we are able to identify sites where alcids, adders, divers do feed and then provide recommendations to the national agency. Why we think it's important and we can influence these policies and decisions is because nothing is defined yet by the French government. They just released, and this is only 3, but they released 4 possible scenarios of where wind farm will be developed in France to reach the targets we have in energy and like green energy. And you see that it can be, some scenarios can be very different along the coast, and the farms can be placed here or further away, etc. This is where the boats are navigating, so we should exclude this area. This is well integrated for human boats, but not yet for birds. And the idea that we collect data to illustrate, to inform where seabirds are foraging, where continental birds are migrating, and be able to make the best choice, because we know there will be a lot of wind farms. But if we can help to avoid the worst places for the birds, we go there. This is just a few slides to illustrate a few species so that you can dream with us. This is Eleonora's falcon from an island, Catalan island, in the Mediterranean, and their migration to Madagascar. We tracked adults and juveniles. This is Arctic black-throated divers that we tagged in Brittany. Some of them moved, and you see that they have a continental flyway to reach the other side of other seas, but then we have a lot of data about where they forage and how they dive. This is an example of a few kittiwakes which had been studied before with geolocators, light loggers attached to the leg. We put some tags with leg loop. We had a birdwatcher doing on a boat photographing birds who saw one of our birds chased by a parasitic jaeger. So we have a nice photo of a kittiwake with this tag. And you see that we recorded birds quite far away to the Faroe Islands, the Azores, and Labrador, etc. And this is a short-eared owl that crossed the channel just after being tagged. And we have a nice track and know at which altitude it flew, it left France, and when it arrived on the coast on the other side, etc. It's at the height of the wind farms anyway. We also integrated many passerine species in these studies, which were not done before. If you look at the references about wind farm collision risk for terrestrial birds, you will find a lot of papers on raptors and storks, but almost nothing on small birds, which are more numerous and probably highly impacted. So we thought it was very important to include many species like that. And we have to retrieve the bird, to take the tag back and be able to have the data. But this provides very interesting data with the recent multi-sensor tags, which include an air pressure sensor and an accelerometer. This is an example for Orphean warblers, which had not been tracked before. So 6 birds have been tracked to their wintering grounds. They use almost the same flyway, same wintering areas, and very similar track when they go down or come back. Then we have also time series of the activity, and we can identify the period when these birds are migrating to inform where the windmills should be stopped, for example. And we have, with the air pressure, the flight altitude profiles of these flights. And you see, in fact, when the first logos like those were used on great-red warbler, it was like, wow, they are going up to 4,000 meters. And then we tagged like common redstarts, windsharks, nightingales, spotted flycatchers, many orphan warblers, tawny pipits, scops all these species do reach such heights when they cross ecological barrier. So it's usual, you will get a lot of birds at 4,000 meters, which you cannot detect by acoustic survey, for example. But then the question is also to know how they behave when they arrive on the continent. It seems that they really jump very rapidly. Like this bird, at the end of the flight, they just jump down, but not always. So that's important to know if you put wind farms along the coast and migrants are arriving. And we'll have the data to try to interpret this. Beyond wind farms, I also started another research project just 100 meters from my office at the museum, which took a lot of place in my, I would say, media environment, but does not take me a lot of time. But it is still in this idea of trying to understand mechanism driving population dynamics to inform public policy, especially concerning also pest species, which are largely hunted for likely economic reasons because they do crop damages, etc., and which seems not to be efficient because we kill every year more and more corvids, foxes, and it does not change things. So the idea was to try to start this, working first on urban crows, then on rural crows and crop damages. Just a short summary in France, each year 500,000 crows, carrion crows, are killed because they are said to be responsible of crop damages, and we want to reduce the crop damages and increase the incomes for the farmers. And the solution proposed since decades is to kill these animals. But we don't observe a decrease in damages. We also estimated the cost of culling compared to the cost of declared damages, and it's 5 times higher. Culling these animals costs 5 times more money than the declared damages. So if it is to be efficient, it would mean that we should get 53 million euros of damages, so that an investment on 45 if culling is reducing the damages from the same amount, which seems very improbable. And the idea is to find some efficient alternative to reduce the damages, and which are maybe more ethical if they don't consider killing these animals as a good solution. So the simplified theory in there is that you have many crows and damages in your fields. If you kill crows, you have less crows and you have no damages. The observed reality is that you kill crows, and then just after there are still so many crows and still damages. So what happens? And that's where research can provide answers. The possible process, it's linked to dispersal of young crows in the spring, which are leaving the cities, going around farmlands in the spring, and then going back to cities. That's a possible mechanism, which is illustrated here with about 50 young crows that I tagged in Paris, and you see there is an increase in dispersal in March, April, and May. That's just when the parents start a new breeding season and chase their former fledglings from the home, and these birds will go around trying to find a place, but then come back to cities because that's where there is food. So my aim this year, the pink spots are the all locations of the tracked crows, and you see this spring dispersal. And my aim this year, in the next weeks, is to catch and tag crows in these two areas, outside in agriculture habitats, and see if in June they move and reintegrate, or if they go to urban areas, which would mean that to regulate, to decrease damages to crops, the solution might be to avoid crows having access to foods in the cities. And why could it be efficient? During the first long lockdown in 2020 in Paris, we had many crows ringed, and we estimated the survival of the birds. Adult birds had the same survival as usual, but young birds, which were 1 year old, had a mortality increase by 4 times. So they really rely on the food which is in the bins. And if you manage to limit this access, you will regulate naturally the size of the crow population, and maybe regulate, reduce the damages in the farmlands. But besides this, we also try to find other efficient solutions by testing some potential repellents to put on the seeds that are used in agriculture. We started with color tests, trying to find which color the crows don't like much. And this year, we will continue with some tastes. It seems that coffee and paper are not very liked by crows, but we have another idea which seems to work very well, which is a chemical product. So we cannot release it in the wild without knowing exactly the effect, the impact it can have. But it's the product that is in, I don't know the English name. You know, when you eat your your nails, you can have some special products that have a bad taste to avoid you to do that. And this seems to be very efficient for the crows. It was advised to me by the veterinary at the small zoo of the museum, because they use it when they do surgery on an animal and they don't want the animal to touch it. They spray this product, which is also available to avoid your dog to eat your chair or your objects. So we'll test this this year and see how the ring crows, how they react, and if they adapt, if they get used to this taste or not. And does it work for all individuals? So this work on crows made me very famous in France, as you see. Also because I'm challenging the culling of so many crows. For this project, I had only a few thousand euros each year. I use the rest of the family food to attract the crows in my trap. And thanks to this study, to a book I published about telling the story of this program, I just obtained about 200,000 euros to continue during each year during 3 years, to continue working on crows, foxes, rooks, to propose alternatives which could be efficient to reduce the damages and increase the farmer incomes, not to reduce the animal numbers. And there was a crow that went into a metro station in Paris that no one could catch and release outside. And finally, I went there and managed to catch a crow. So again, I was in many newspapers. I'm the hero. That's fun because it's one bird that people thought it will die. It must be stressed. It had nothing to eat, nothing to drink. In fact, there is water. There are mice. People just send food in the bins in the metro, so that there is a lot of food. And catching it and releasing it maybe was very mediatized on TV, radio, and journals like that. So this was to show, we talked about migrant birds, divers, going out to the sea, autumn buntings at the end of Europe, but this is also my job, going at night, between 1 and 4 in the morning, in a metro station, putting mist nets, having the surprise to have a train and some works in the station during the whole night, so it was not possible to catch, coming back the next week and catching the crow. But this is also one of my office. I didn't talk to you about that, but I also had the chance to develop a project in French Polynesia, which is again studying migrant birds with the idea that long-distance migrants should be sensitive, more sensitive to their environment, and especially like bar-tailed godwits migrating from Alaska to New Zealand are able to anticipate storms, to fly around, and we think that they are sensitive to infrasound and that they could be able to adapt their behavior. And the idea on this island is to put tags, wait for a hurricane or maybe a tsunami, and see if migratory birds could be a complementary early warning system for local populations to protect human beings and goods. So this is my team when we go there, so my job is also that. And this was just to finish. I'm not only in the metro and in Paris, and as you understand, I really enjoy my job. And my last word would say, because like we talked yesterday at the round table, I'm very lucky. I do my dream job. I even do not separate job and my private activities because I'm a bird watcher since ever. I think we must be very serious in our research, but I think we should not take us as too much serious, even when we are working like here. Thank you very much.